Welcome, everyone, to this afternoon's conversation. Thank you for coming. I'm Austin Bunn. I am the director of the Milstein Program in Technology and Humanity here at Cornell, and it is my pleasure to welcome today's guest, security and privacy expert Ulfar Erlingsson, for our In Focus speaker series entitled A Life Making Your Software Secure and Your Data Private, or at least trying to. The Milstein program offers a digital curriculum for a select group of Cornell undergraduates working at the intersection point of technology and humanities. The In Focus series brings leading professionals to campus, let's call it eCampus, to explore their postgraduate journeys and share their insights about the very human impacts of technology and change. Ulfar himself is a sort of honorary Milsteiner with a computer science PhD from Cornell with a minor in modernism in English literature, which we'll hear more about. Last week, Ulfar started as chief architect at a cloud security company in Silicon Valley called Lacework. Previously, Ulfar worked at Apple, where he led technology efforts that enable machine learning with strong privacy guarantees. Since the mid-1990s, his career has centered on research and advanced development of computer security and privacy technologies, most often with a systems building and programming language bent. This includes a decade in technical leadership at Google, as well as stints at Microsoft Research and as an associate professor at Reykjavik University in Iceland, where he's from. He has also led computer security and privacy technology at two startups, Green Border Technologies and Decode Genetics. Lastly, he is also on the advisory board of the Milstein program itself. Today's conversation will be moderated by Baobao Zhang, a Klarman postdoctoral fellow here at Cornell, affiliated with the Department of Government. In the fall of 2021, she will be an assistant professor at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. Her current research focuses on the governance of artificial intelligence. She studies public and elite opinion toward AI, and her work has been published in PLS 0+1, Political Analysis, and the Journal of Artificial Intelligence Research, and many others. Here's how today's conversation is going to work. Ulfar will do a brief autobiographical presentation with some slides, followed by a moderated Q&A by Baobao, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience and for a total of about 50 minutes. If you'd like to ask Ulfar a question, feel free to use the chat box in this Zoom window, and Baobao will field it to Ulfar. And with that, I will let Ulfar take it away.
Thanks, Austin. Great to be here. Great to be speaking to Milstein participants, and I'm sorry that I'm not able to see your faces. I've been lucky enough to meet some of you in person, and looking forward to being able to do that again. So I guess since all of you are sort of at one point or another in your college journey, I'll sort of start with why I got to where I am, which was mostly because I have a very short attention span. I'm kind of ADHD. I want to, do the new thing and so on. And when I finished my undergraduate education, I was clear that I did not want to go and be a software developer or start sort of working in companies 9 to 5. I wanted to do something different. And so I went and did a PhD eventually at Cornell. But again, my sort of short attention span also meant that I was interested in all kinds of different things. I did that minor in English literature and other stuff at the same time. And I can't advise people to do a PhD just because they're not wanting to go right away into the job market. A PhD is really a vocational training program for being a professor type figure. But I can recommend learning how to tell stories. And so I think that is what I got out of both the PhD training program of doing research and also out of the minor in English literature. People don't actually respond very well to facts. So as humans, we just don't respond very well to information. And often it's said that you need to be a top-notch communicator to be impactful, or to be a top professor or scientist. But in fact, I think it goes further than that. I think you have to be a top-notch storyteller, and you have to tell convincing stories. Even if you do the best research in the world, if you can't actually convey that information in a way that grabs people's attention, then nobody's going to actually pay much attention, and the work will have been for naught. So, so definitely the Milstein program is something that I believe very strongly in, this combination of liberal arts skills and science. And I think it is also good for whatever your career will wind up being. So as I said, I went into a PhD program sort of out of lack of direction or lack of clarity what I wanted to do. I've done a lot of different things since. I have sort of wandered into computer security and privacy. I think that was mostly by accident, because when I was doing my PhD at Cornell, the internet happened. Sort of 95 is when like the whole world started using the internet. Of course, us computer scientists had been using it for a while before that, but the rest of the world all of a sudden started using it. And now we're all using it as basically this essential tool for our entire life. And it was immediately clear that everything was going to go terribly wrong. And so with that, I'd like to go to my first slide here, which is a quote from Butler Lampton, who is a Turing Award winner. That's kind of like the Nobel Prize of Computer Science. He's actually, in many ways, the sort of foundational figure in computer security. Late 60s, early 70s, he was defining what the field was. And then about 20 years ago, he did a retrospective series of talks and a write-up about computer security in the real world. And his takeaway was that it's a miserable failure. Computer security doesn't work. And I think that all people here sort of intuitively know that, because over the last 20 years, and all of you are at least are in that age range, we've seen more and more security problems all the time. People are losing their data. You have to worry about your phone being hacked. You have to worry about this being hacked. You have to worry about your privacy here and so on. So computer security is now a fundamental problem for everyday life of every person, almost in the world. Certainly if you include possible attacks on power generating stations and so on, definitely is for everybody in the world. And Butler's observation was computer security is actually much harder than real world security. And that's because security is kind of saying it has to be correct, but we all know that software is buggy, full of bugs. And actually the security bugs are going to be harder than the other types of bugs, because bugs usually sort of occur randomly, or like we stumble into something that doesn't work, and we don't do it on purpose. We're not out looking for it. But the guys that are trying to attack, they're definitely looking for it. And since there are so many of these bugs, they'll find them. And then once they find them, they'll be able to use them again and again. So as I said, in the 90s, it was immediately clear that, oh my God, everybody's computer is going to be controlled by bad people, not the people who think they own that computer. And so that was sort of obvious to us at the time. There were some technologies like Java was positioned as a sort of Java applets and code security and so on. And a lot of that work, which we did at Cornell at the time, actually has been very influential recently, especially in the Rust programming language, which is a low-level systems programming language that's very efficient, that actually allows you to write code that is pretty much guaranteed not to have certain types of problems. And that really comes into typed assembly language research that was done at Cornell around that time. But not all software is written in Rust. In fact, software is just terrible. And so, and every time you go do something on the internet, you're basically asking somebody, please control my computer through the software I'm using. The web page that's being displayed is really a program that's running on your computer. And so I did a computer security startup 20 years ago that said, well, it can't possibly be right that that program, that web page, gets to control your entire computer. And we have to somehow put that program in a sandbox. And that actually sandboxing technology was the basis of the Chrome web browser, which was the first browser to do really hardcore sandboxing and really enable sort of relatively safe browsing of the web. So I worked on those types of problems. There's technologies in Windows that sort of try to deal with the fact that software is just absolutely terrible and full of holes, and make the problem a little bit less problematic. Right now at the company that I just joined, I've sort of taken a different approach, which I actually, for 10 years, I was at Google, half of that time in Google Brain, the AI research organization, but half of it leading research in the security infrastructure team. And when I was there, I actually was very, very sort of obsessed by the possibilities of doing security correctly, like really have an impact on this terrible problem. And for that, we can go back to what Butler Lampton sort of described 50 years ago when defining computer security. Computer security is all about having somebody try to do something and then rules about should I allow it or not. And so if you're not supposed to allow it, you can stop it, which is intrusion prevention or proactive security. Or you could just always allow everything and you write down in a log everything that happened. And then later on you go and look and see, did that make sense? Was that reasonable? That's intrusion detection, sort of a reactive type of thing. And there's a few things to note here. So this is all of computer security. It doesn't matter what it is. The prevention stuff doesn't really work all that well, because if you get it slightly wrong, you prevent people from doing what they want to do. And what they're going to do is they're going to force you to open the floodgates again. Like they can't get their work done. It's like they're going to figure a way around that. And so in many ways, the after the fact inspection is easier, but at that same time, if you get it wrong there, you're going to have way too many alerts, and so the guy is just going to fall asleep. So the thing is that real world security is always going to allow too much, and it's never going to allow too little. The only choice is, do you want to get false alerts, or do you want to actually just blindly allow too much? And so a lot of security has been finding black sheep and defining rules for finding black sheep. That's write everything down that's happening, and let's go and write rules that identify the black sheep. This is cool because no alerts, but it turns out that there's a ton of these black sheep, and writing a rule for just one of them means that the bad guys can just slightly change the color, or the wicked smile of the little black sheep, or make it non-cross-eyed or something. And they're going to get past your rule, still going to be able to do their attack. And most importantly, you actually never get any value out of these rules. These rules are all about black sheep, and they're not telling you anything useful about what you're actually doing. What you care about when you're doing something on your computer is not the black sheep. It's the white sheep, the stuff that you're doing. You'd like that to work very well. Black sheep, preventing them is kind of, something that you have to do, I guess. But there's another way around this, which is behavioral anomaly detection, which says, well, let's just figure out what the sheep that you want are like. And then anything that's not what you want, we can sort of say that we don't want any of that. And the problem is it's really hard to get started here. So if you look at what you're doing or what your computer is doing, you think that, okay, there's no attacker in there yet. I'm just going to record what it's doing. I'm going to allow all of that. The problem is you're not going to actually exhibit everything that the computer is doing. You're just going to see a little bit of it. And in fact, there's going to be slightly different colored sheep sort of in the long tail. And you have to run things for a long while, or as in cloud computing at like huge scales to see things. And so that's basically what I'm doing at Lacework, is I'm focused on this approach of using modern cloud computing to actually learn behavior profiles that are useful. And so the thing is, once you learn these behavioral profiles, they're actually pretty easy to maintain, because things mostly are the same as they used to be. You don't have to constantly have new rules. And it's actually very useful to know what is going on. It's useful to know that all of my sheep are supposed to be white and so on. So this really empowers people. So this is one form of security, something that I've been passionate about for a while. I actually wrote a paper about it a few years ago, and you can find that on Archive. So the other thing that I worked on a lot, and actually comes out of this idea of data-driven software security, is privacy and machine learning privacy. And so what does machine learning privacy mean? Well, it turns out that machine learning is really, really simplistic. And it will always do the simplest thing that it can do to solve the problem you're asking it to do. So if you ask machine learning of any type to classify the two different animals here, so find what is a dog versus what is a cat, in this data set, you have the training data on the left-hand side, what the model is going to learn is that very white objects are cats, because that's true of all of the data. It's not going to actually learn anything about the shape of the animals, and so it's just going to learn that like big white blobs are cats, and it's going to be confused if anything gray shows up. Similarly, anything black is going to be a dog. Now, so it learns these general rules, but then it also, if you have something like a spotted dog here, it will just memorize that as an exception. So machine learning will inherently remember the training data in these exceptions. And so we can actually solve that. Now this gets into sort of the data-driven software security stuff. If we wanted to learn what are all the users of a particular piece of software doing, what are the system calls or messages they're sending and so on, we're kind of trying to learn what the shape of the forest is. So like, what does the forest overall look like? What is its shape, topology, size of the open areas, and so on, without learning anything about the individual trees. And there's a technique for doing that, which I actually spearheaded at Google and has been very successfully applied at Apple and other companies since, which actually has this nice property called differential privacy. And so if we look at the individual trees in the hands of this particular forest here, we can see that, well, there are some trees in individual positions. And then if we imagine that each tree is representing something that a user or a piece of software execution or something might tell us, let's not have those users tell us that. Let's have them flip a bit with probability 25% on that original image. So if there was a tree with 25% probability, there's no longer a tree. If there was no tree with 25% probability, there is now a tree. And so if we do that, it turns out this has excellent privacy properties. And if we zoom out, we can actually see the forest still, or at least we can learn the same things. What are the open regions in the forest? What is the overall shape, and so on. And now this is actually useful for learning about security of software, which is something that I've worked on. And it's been applied. If you use Gmail, then you'll notice that sometimes when you're typing, there will be a long sequence suggested. That's actually trained on people's real emails. And the reason that we never suggest something that's sort of from any one user or a small group of users' emails is because we do these types of differentially private learning tricks. Otherwise, the joke here might be true, where you're typing a prefix and you get some really sensitive data out. So it turns out that privacy is also helpful with explainability, because privacy means that we can't learn anything that's kind of unique, but we can learn things that are generally true. Like we can learn that smoking causes cancer from the medical records of a lot of people, but we can't learn anything about or a very minimal improvement in our guess about whether Aunt Jamie is a smoker or not. And so we can use that to make things that are really unique and very unlike everything else, something that we cannot learn with privacy. And if we learn with different levels of privacy, we can actually sort of hierarchically start stacking these things up and sorting them by how much privacy did we actually need to have to learn them or not learn them. And the things that are sort of most generally true, the most sort of canonical examples, will be the ones that you can learn with the most privacy. Okay, so that's about it from me. I'm going to just go back to the beginning and start sort of the discussion.
Thank you so much, Udvar, for presenting. I learned a lot from your presentation. Now I'm going to ask some questions that I have prepared. So the first question is, can you tell us about Lacework, your newest effort, and what can Lacework do that your previous places where you work, like Apple and Google, can't?
So what Lacework does, basically, it tries to do security by learning what is normal and what's supposed to happen. It does this in the cloud, which is one of the, or sort of in cloud native applications. That's really one of the few places where you can imagine that working. It's all relatively new software. It's all relatively simple once it's up and running, sort of in the steady state execution. It's quite simple. It's made out of these containers or virtual machines or services like Apache Kafka or Spark or other. So the components are relatively well understood, and they all communicate over network messages. And so we don't have to worry about sort of there being paths we can't mediate on. One of the things in computer security is you want to actually see everything that's going on and not have people be able to circumvent your monitoring or somehow corrupt your monitoring. And by learning what's normal, we can actually have a much better way of doing security that is fundamentally different from what the field has been doing so far. In particular, we can enable the software developers to be the ones that actually get this information about what's really going on, because they understand what should be going on. And instead of having that extra security team that's just managing these lists of black sheep that actually nobody else in the company cares about, so we can sort of merge the security team with the software development team. And the reason Google and Amazon and Apple and so on can't do that is that almost all of these companies are sort of multi-cloud, and they don't actually want to tie themselves in directly with the offerings from just one of these companies. And now, could, say, Google have a multi-cloud solution? Yes, possibly, but at the same time, they don't really, and so that's what we're doing.
Thank you for explaining. Now I'm kind of going into some of the substantive things that you talked about. Are there cases where differential privacy might not be a good solution? For instance, I work with the US Census Bureau. Many researchers are concerned that the Census Bureau's differential privacy algorithm could make population estimates in counties with very few people less accurate. They could also make estimates of small subpopulations, for instance, the percentage of non-white populations in a predominantly white county, less accurate. So what do you think about these trade-offs in the Census Bureau's work and other data science estimates?
Yeah. So absolutely, differential privacy is not a panacea, and it's not at all accurate in all cases. And the best example is actually the one that you're pointing out, which is that privacy increases bias. And so it does this in a very natural way. So that picture that I showed in the tail, you're going to have small populations. So let's imagine that you have like Inuits are already a small population, or people from Iceland are a small population. And then we're spread out, like, how many people from Iceland are in Kansas and so on. Those people are basically not going to be represented at all if you learn things with privacy, because they will literally be invisible. And but this is even worse because there's this curve, and there's been recent work that show that sort of even for large populations, like 10% of all people, like African Americans in the United States and so on, differentially private learning will increase bias and make outcomes worse in ways that prevent fairness. There's a whole study of fairness, and you could say that privacy and fairness is in direct opposition with each other. And now it's a policy and government sort of public policy type question of how do we balance these two things? We can't have fairness and privacy at the same time. And now what is the solution? I don't know really, but absolutely, it's not always the right thing. I think that for the things that the Census Bureau did, they did a very careful analysis of this, and in their tabular outputs and so on, they actually have very good reasons to believe that in almost all cases, the numbers are more accurate and more representative of the different categories and so on than before, because they already had to do privacy. Remember, they had to change the numbers and so on. And in the cases where there were small populations before, because they had to do privacy and because of sampling error and so on, that error is bigger than the error induced by privacy.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. This is sort of relevant to our current events. Should everyday people be concerned about cyber attacks from foreign entities? Let's take SolarWinds as an example. So we heard that parts of the Pentagon, the Department of Homeland Security, the State Department, and the Department of Energy were attacked by this malware. But now it seems that 80% of the victims that were targeted were non-governmental organizations. These are places where many people work or study. Are we just everyday folks, are we sort of sitting ducks? Is there anything that we can do as consumers and also as citizens?
Well, I think as citizens, we can ask for more investment and more accountability. I think for government attacks, my worry would mostly be infrastructure, like power plants and so on. We have to secure our infrastructure better. We saw what happened in Texas. That was, due to natural causes. Similar things can be done by cyber attacks. In terms of information loss, as consumers, everybody should assume that your data that you put on the internet is basically public. And that includes your Gmail account and so on. Now, I happen to have worked in the team that runs security at Google. They hired all of the best people in the world. They invested a ridiculous amount of money. And actually, there's reason to believe that your Gmail account has not been leaked in the hands of bad guys. But for almost anything else, any school chat board or whatever, assume that this is part of the public domain information in the future. Like, never assume that that actually is not public information, because it's not just state actors. There's also entities that exfiltrate such data, make it public on purpose. There's ransomware and so on. And that, again, as consumers, we can ask for that situation to improve.
Yeah, that's very useful advice for everyday people, like members of the audience, considering what we should be doing. Speaking of everyday users, workers, students, how do you take into account human behavior when you're designing security systems? We're often thinking about cases where someone made a weak password, like password 1234, and it's an easy way for a hacker to get into a system. Do you work with human-computer interaction researchers in your day-to-day?
I have often in the past, and it's actually an incredibly important aspect of computer security. Security is, and privacy and many other aspects of technology are sort of these multifaceted things where you have to look holistically at the problem. And, on the topic of passwords, I just complained at my current company that one of the password policies was demanding way too strong a password. And this is at a security company, and I'm the sort of one of the main security guys, and I was telling them, look, guys, this requirement for this many special characters and so on in the password is completely unreasonable. And that's because there have been lots of studies that have found that if you make things too hard, humans will find a way. They'll, and one of the ways is like they'll write down their password or whatever they need to. And so that research is super important. Weak mechanisms are not necessarily bad. So, here I have an iPhone that sort of looks at my face, and somebody could make a mold of my face and actually log into this iPhone using that mechanism. Similarly, I have an Android phone with a fingerprint reader here, and, there's probably the fingerprint from my hands on the phone itself. So you could actually unlock this by, as a security researcher, I know this. But on the alternative is that I run this with almost no password whatsoever, because you have to take this up and look at it or use it multiple times a day. I guess we look at our phones every 2 minutes. So it's a trade-off. You try to get the strongest mechanism and the most reasonable thing that works in every circumstance.
Yeah, I think that's a very useful way to think about it, not just in terms of one solution, but what are the trade-offs? So speaking of things that are sort of not perfect and had a lot of trade-offs going into it, so Apple and Google developed a smartphone exposure notification system for COVID-19 that relies on Bluetooth signals, and the data is largely stored on users' phones. I think the system has relatively good privacy features. It's harder, though, for researchers to study its effectiveness because there's no central cloud database. So 29 US states have deployed the system. Unfortunately, uptake here is very low compared to, say, the UK or Germany. I think in New York State, where Cornell is, it's only 9% of the population who have downloaded and used the app. And so I guess we're running into this issue where we have this software that has good privacy preserving features, relatively so compared to other apps that might track your location, for instance. A lot of people don't seem to trust this exposure notification app. You talked about explainability. So how do we get people to understand the software that might have more privacy preserving features, but it's a bit hard to explain. I gave a presentation earlier to a group of bioethicists and had to explain how this works. And it was tricky. So
I have a great explanation. So I worked on the system. So let me answer your question. So I worked on this system, and I worked on the privacy preserving aspects of the system. And yes, explainability is a great way to start. Like, you want to be able to explain why it's okay. And one way of doing that, and the best way that I found, is imagine you're sort of a very lonely person, and every person you meet, you ask for their phone number. But for whatever reason, they never give you their real phone number. They always give you a fake phone number. In fact, they give you this long random number. And even if you're sitting next to the same person, you have a bad memory, you keep asking them for their phone number, and they keep giving you long random numbers. You write all of these down in a little black book. And now, if any one of them winds up being sick, there'll be a billboard in the middle of town with the numbers of those sick people. And because you have a very good index in your little black book, you'll be immediately able to see that, oh my God, I sat next to an infected person. Now that's storytelling. That goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning. You have to have good ways of telling the story. Unfortunately, in the case of privacy and so on, that conflicts with other types of stories, especially in the United States, where sort of this this lack of trust in government entities is very strong. Countries like Finland have a fantastic record in rolling out these applications, these technologies, basically getting everybody to use it, and they're very, very useful. But those countries have a different story that's ingrained, where the government doing things is not a bad thing. But if there's any core story in the United States that seems to resonate very strongly, it's that governments doing thing is a bad thing. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't. But again, people will actually respond to stories. And so I worked on with a team that was rolling out these technologies with the states and so on. I don't know how they could have done a better job in the US. It's just really hard to work against those ingrained, deeply felt stories.
Yeah, thank you for describing in a way that I can understand, and hopefully the audience members will understand. I'm working with folks in public health to figure out how can we communicate the story better to members of the public. Considering the past 5 years, what surprised you the most in terms of breakthroughs in your field?
So security is terrible, just absolutely the worst. And so, and privacy is no better. It's like, it's more complicated. So I wouldn't say that there are breakthroughs. I will say in computer science, and this touches on security and privacy actually, we're in the middle of this fantastic revolution where finally we can have correct software. Remember at the beginning, I talked about how security is a form of correctness and all software is full of bugs. Well, it turns out that we can now have software that's not full of bugs. This is totally possible. And it requires advanced technologies and so on that people have known about for a while, but those technologies were not really practicable. You couldn't really do it until just a handful of years ago. Now we can actually build quite complex systems, like, you imagine, something that somebody might have used, say, for the control systems for the space shuttle or something like that. Those systems were actually not fully correct in the ways that we now know how to do fully correct software. And so there's a notion called total correctness, which means that it always behaves exactly as expected, and it always actually finishes execution. It doesn't get into an infinite loop. And so we can now have that, and we don't have to have huge investments. We can actually hire people to do this these days. The software can't be big, it can't be a web browser, it can't be an operating system, or even like the Zoom chat, but parts of those software could have this property. And that's just absolutely outstanding, amazing stuff.
I'm glad to hear that the field is advancing in this good direction. Now, switching topics a little bit, looking back when you were at Cornell, how did you feel that your minor in modernism in English literature has influenced your work in computer science? Has it made you a better storyteller, for instance?
I think it totally has. I mean, I don't know if it's the minor. So one of the things you do when you do the humanities or liberal arts and so on is you take things that are relatively commonplace, like, a lot of people, back when people used to read stuff, I don't know if, that's, still happening, but most people had read novels. Now they listen to podcasts and maybe they'll listen to an audiobook of a novel. But one thing that, the minor did, and Dan Swartz was my advisor and mentor, famous Cornell professor in the humanities, this really close reading, like read every single word, think about its meaning, think about how it changes the meaning of the sentence and so on. That has been tremendously helpful. I write extremely slowly as a result, and I think about every single word, every single position and so on. But at the same time, what I wind up writing doesn't get in the way of itself when trying to convey the story. So I am or am not a good storyteller. Sometimes I think I am, sometimes I think I'm not that great, but at least when I'm writing, I'm not writing in a way that sort of leads the attention away from the story that I'm trying to tell.
I think we can all learn something from a field that's very different from ours. Thank you for answering my questions. Now I'm going to move from questions from the audience. And thank you everyone who's joined us for this conversation. We have lots of questions from the audience. I don't know if we can get to all of them, but I'll try to get to most of them. So we have a question from ND, I think that's initials. How far behind are we than China in terms of AI use? And I guess I'm going to tie this to the U.S. National Security Commission on AI report that came out yesterday that has, once again, made this question very salient. But I also want to frame it, is the framework of thinking about AI in terms of competition, nationalistic competition, one that's really beneficial for society, for humanity?
I don't think so. I think that the best way that I can think of, and again, this is storytelling, the way I can think of AI, modern AI, we don't have AI yet. What we have is a new way to program. So remember that talking about software and how software is full of bugs, partly the reason why software is full of bugs, it's created by humans that are in effect writing a recipe for how to cook a duck or something like that. And and the recipe isn't exactly precise, there are holes and so on. Now, we've only known how to tell computers what to do by writing these recipes. And the computers do exactly what we tell them to do, and humans make mistakes and oversights and so on. That's why we have these bugs in the computers. Now, AI, modern AI, is really programming in a very different way. So humans write a recipe once, but that recipe is a search procedure that finds good solutions, that finds needles in haystacks. And we've discovered how to have those search procedures find great needles in the haystack of all possible solution when we feed them a lot of data. So in a sense, we're programming using data. And so remember those pictures of the black and white animals and so on. What we get will depend completely on what the data is that we're feeding into them, and some details of the search procedure. And so right now, the whole world is advancing in this. There's been a little bit of a plateau in the last few years, but we're still making excellent progress. But it's just a new way of programming. And in fact, this new way of programming has new forms of bugs. It turns out that you can flip a handful of pixels in images and so on. These are called adversarial examples. And the needle you found, the solution, will be completely confused. And so this is just a new way to program. I don't think it's a thing that, we should think of as nation state competition like ICBM missiles or something like that.
Yeah, I agree that I think it's sort of hyping up the rhetoric isn't necessarily good for the safety and security of AI systems. Now we have a question from William Ling. With the increase of devices in the Internet of Things and consumer technology, like driverless vehicles, et cetera, where the hardware has to be secured, what efforts are being made to secure the hardware on top of the software?
Yeah, so hardware security is very interesting. So there's actually been a tremendous amount of work on hardware security. And almost all of it sort of originates in smart cards. So these cards that are on your like SIM cards and so on. So this is the sort of field that actually is going back 30 years of trying to make these little chips secure for whatever secure means. And basically, it's not really feasible to make them secure against somebody who has them in their physical possession. But we might be able to make machines that are secure against various forms of attacks as long as you don't have them in their physical possession. So imagine something that we can sort of harden in such a way that electromagnetic waves and power attacks and various software attacks, especially when coupled with this notion of correctness that I told you that it's just now becoming possible. We can actually have correct software running on top of provably correct hardware. So provably correct software, provably correct hardware that runs in a way where, similarly to these chips, we actually have hardened against various forms of sort of casual physical attacks. Not $10,000 or $100,000 lab equipment attacks, but somebody walking by the machine, for instance. So that definitely is feasible. How does that play with Internet of Things? Well, it actually we are used to very imperfect physical security systems. Think of the locks on your doors or the windows in your house. These are not going to keep anybody out, really. What they do is they deter people from trying to break things. Anybody with a crowbar can actually break through it. So you can imagine that something similar might occur with IoT devices. You have to have physical access to begin with, and then you have to have some proper tools to do bad things. And that's already a much bigger obstacle than usual software security, where anybody anywhere in the world could be attacking you through the internet.
Thank you for explaining. Now we have a question from an audience member. This is sort of targeted more towards the undergraduates who are listening. What would be the best major if you're interested in computer science, robotics, programming, and AI? Obviously, CS would be a good one, but what are some other majors that come to mind when you think someone who wants to enter the space?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with all of the major. I mean, I think Cornell is great in that sort of computing has become pervasive across the different fields. So I wouldn't worry too much about your major. I would just I mean, like you could major in statistics or electrical engineering. But just, tie yourself, or, major in the humanities. But, if you tie yourself correctly with what's happening in the School of Computing and take the courses that are offered there, then you can learn about, for instance, programming with data, this thing that I was talking about with AI. That's actually useful in all possible fields. And, if you want to be an artist, you can make use of that. If you want to be a writer, you can make use of that, et cetera, et cetera.
That's very good advice. And I started at Cornell about 6 months ago, and I'm just amazed at the variety of courses that are offered here, not just, in computer science, but also in other disciplines that teach you these skills. Now we have a question from Ethan Goldman. Oh, I think this question has been answered already, but if you have more to say about it, how do you think your literature education has helped you in your career and work? I guess to add to this question, what was one work that you read during your time at Cornell when you were taking literature classes that really influenced your thinking? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I was a big fan of Joseph Conrad. And so usually like people like to think of The Heart of Darkness when they, which was made into Apocalypse Now, the movie. Joseph Conrad was, just too far back in the past to be eligible for the Nobel Prize in Literature. If he had, been around a few years later, he probably would have got it. He was a very influential writer. One of the books that I read when I was doing my English literature is Lord Jim, which is an excellent sort of study in perception and sort of self-image. And I think that, as opposed to like other more heavyweight works like, Ulysses and so on, that also, have unreliable narrators and so on. But this, maybe that's, what I'm trying to get at is everybody's an unreliable narrator. And like everybody comes in with their, so there's been a lot of in United States corporate culture, there's been a lot of implicit bias training and so on. And but it's worthwhile to just learn that right away, that we're all incredibly biased in different ways, both in the stories we tell others and also in the stories we tell ourselves. And Lord Jim is an exploration of that.
Thank you for the recommendation. Now we have a question from Jay, kind of we're pinging back and forth between the literature and now the technical aspects. Jay asks, would you have any suggestions for how a small tech startup can ensure the security of its data? I think that's a concern that a lot of small startups might have. Do they have the resources to do it?
I don't know. And it's incredible. There are very few organizations in the world that have the resources. I mean, there's like 3. There's Amazon, there's Google, and maybe Facebook. I don't know. But it depends on how seriously they take it. Amazon and Google take it very seriously. They're very good people. I don't know about the rest. And actually Microsoft is pretty good as well. And Apple tries hard, but Apple's main defense, and this is actually, the team I was working on, they don't have any data. So you don't have to worry because the data never leaves your phone, et cetera, for the most part. And so that's their defense as opposed to being very good at protecting your data. So I don't know what type of work the startup would be doing. Our company, Lacework, that I just joined, is for companies that are cloud native. And so there are other sort of security as a service is the sort of notion that you get somebody else to do the security, and so you don't have to do it. And that's really the only way you could possibly get any decent security in a small startup.
Thank you. Next question is from Max. How do you expect the field of quantum computing to impact cybersecurity in the future? I think that's a concern that a lot of us have. Could it be used to bypass even the strongest of modern cybersecurity mechanisms?
I actually ran a workshop on that at Stanford with a number of other people, and sort of this post-quantum crypto impact on security. And so the net result of that workshop, it was a DARPA workshop, was that we really don't need to worry very much, except for one thing. There's one area that would actually get really badly broken if quantum cryptography or if quantum methods were able to break existing cryptography. And that's software updates. So IoT devices or computers, like we have lots of computers all over the place, and they usually have ways of adding new code to them. This gets back into this hardware security. So really what those devices do is not really driven by the hardware as much as the hardware and the firmware or the low-level code that's baked into those devices. And though that code can usually be updated if you have the right key. And so those keys need to be post-quantum very soon. We don't have to worry about quantum being broken in the next 10 or 20 years. I worked at Google with people that are doing this type of stuff and so on. Nothing's going to change in the next 10 to 20 years. If it had changed already, that's another thing we did in the DARPA workshop. We think that there would be ways of telling. It's too powerful a thing to not make use of in some way. And there are easier things to do anyway. It's hard to see why somebody would try to make the investment. But yes, so we need post-quantum cryptography on software security update mechanisms. That's what we need. And there are lots of people that are actually working on that. That need is pretty well understood, and particularly after this workshop I ran.
That's a reassuring answer. Makes me feel more assured. Now we have a question from Chris. What can we do personally to secure our computers? Do you have any other tips besides the password, making sure that it's something that you can remember and not too complicated, requiring special characters, etc.?
Yeah, so good question. If you can use a Chromebook for everything you do. They're very secure devices. If you're doing things that you don't know if you should be doing, visiting suspicious websites or something like that, boot the Chromebook into guest mode, do it in guest mode. Once you get out of guest mode, the whole thing will be gone. So it's sort of a way of sort of browsing the internet with a set of protective rubber gloves. And so don't install too many pieces of software. Get rid of software that you actually aren't using, and use a password manager. Google Chrome has a very good built-in password manager, so you are not going to be able to remember all of the passwords. Certainly not if you use good sort of unique passwords. The main problem with passwords is not actually how complex they are, it's that they get reused. And so if you have a unique password for every place, you're not going to remember it. So you need a wallet for that. So those are some of the obvious ones. If you have to use like a Windows machine or a Mac machine, try to keep it as simple as possible. Preferably if you have a gaming computer or a computer that's full of crap, use a separate computer for that. Get the second computer for that. You're never going to have a secure computer with all of your tax records and financial stuff and so on if you install random software on there.
Olafur, I'm going to step in mindful of the time and knowing it is the second week of work for you at a new job, wanting you to be able to get back to whatever you need to do today. But I wanted to thank you so much for today's super enlightening and accessible talk. Bao Bao, thank you for all your wonderful questions and for moderating. This has been incredibly useful. Ulfar, before you go, I wanted to ask you one last question, and maybe because I too am a storyteller, super interested in the novel. Do you have a book recommendation for anyone who might be listening right now?
Yes, I think the absolute best book that I've read in the last 2 to 3 years, it's actually a trilogy. It's called the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. And shouldn't be difficult to find. It got a lot of accolades, won some major sci-fi awards. It's not really a science fiction book, and it starts off with a very sort of heartbreaking event. So you may sort of you may want to read up on like what happens at the beginning if you're sensitive. But it's really about humans, and you know, I think that in my work life. And this is maybe with a fundamental reason why I can recommend the Milstein program. And here's sort of the last pithy sort of pitch. We are not, so I've been doing advanced technology research my entire career. And technology has never been the problem. The problem is always people. It's convincing people, it's working with people and so on. And we do not get enough training in playing nice with other people, in understanding other people, listening to other people. And so if you think that engineers in top companies sit and are trying to work on hard technical problems, you'd be wrong. They're all working on interpersonal problems with conflicts with other engineers, et cetera. The more you work on yourself, the more you try to understand people, the better you're going to be in whatever you do. And the Broken Earth trilogy is really about people.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh, that's a must read. So for any of you who enjoyed this conversation, this In Focus talk, in about 3 or 4 weeks, we'll be speaking with Nani de la Peña, who is the godmother of virtual reality. And we'd love to welcome you back for that. But for today, Ulfar, Bao Bao, thank you both so much for taking the time today. This has been fantastic. And I look forward to hearing more about your work in the future, Ulfar. Good luck.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.